The Seattle Times ran it, but they stuck it in a bigger story about Iraq that day, kind of at the end. The LA Times ran it on page A4, an abbreviated version of the full story. There were some papers in the Midwest that actually ran it, but most newspapers did not. No television and radio ran it at all. So here was absolute proof that we're torturing people to death. And corporate media in the United States decided the American people didn't even know that. So that's where I became absolutely convinced this is deliberate. And so as we see these things, and we see these stories come forward, disinformation or big broadcasts like the pulling down of the statue of Saddam Hussein, which was this paternal image, this continuing image that keeps getting replayed on television, with cheering Iraqis and are so happy that the Americans have come to get rid of this terrible dictator. Those cheering Iraqis were planted there by the U.S. military, by the PR firm, the Rennan Group. They were part of what had been Shalabi's Iraqi Congress, and they were flown in to be the crowd. Because ordinary Iraqis weren't going to be out there in anything to do with what the Americans were doing. They just invaded their country. So they get a tank to pull down the statue, they get her cheering plants to be the image, and that becomes the story that's supposed to convince us all that the Iraqis are so happy we invaded their country. So that's pure propaganda. That's pure lies. And PR firms are doing this on a regular basis, or completely ignoring stories, or putting out deliberate stories to keep us uninformed and uneducated about what's really going on. So that there's a difference here. There's a rift between reality and reporting in the United States today, and it's peaking. So when we say that there's a truth emergency in the United States, we really mean that. This is an international truth emergency. And we had the first Truth Emergency Conference 2 years ago at Santa Cruz. It'll be this January, where 400 activists from around the country came together who had various issues. You know, election fraud, depleted uranium, the war issues, 9/11, that haven't been covered by the corporate media, and how they're deliberately excluded or labeled as conspiracy theorists or in some way denigrated, and the issues don't get covered. We start to look at the commonalities of what was going on between us. And that's where the Media Freedom, the PNN, Personal News Network site, emerged from, where we were picking sources that we trust. We've had that up now for 1.5 years, which is daily news from independent sources. But what we've got, this truth emergency is reflective of corporate media news, because young people don't read newspapers anymore. 5%, I bet you 5% in this room read a newspaper, if that. The numbers for those under 30 is less than 5% reading a daily newspaper. And so the newspapers are in decline. What's really accelerated, of course, is corporate media, television, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, so that the news from corporate media is what we call hyper-real. And a hyper-real means that you can't really tell what's real and what's not. So it's sort of like being at Disneyland. You know you're really there, but you also know it's not real. So there's a hyper-reality of news inside of corporate media that kind of creates this continuing excitement. So there's stories about celebrities. There's stories that you can gossip about. The balloon boy and all this junk food stuff that Mickey was talking about. But there's also, huge amounts of stuff that meant to scare us. Bad people around the world that are out to get us. And that's kind of continuing degree to which there's this emotional content in corporate media, something to gossip about, something to think about, something to be happy about, something to be afraid about, something to be, worried about. And it's always, whatever car crashes and murders have happened locally, or even anywhere in the world, you get the biggest updates on scary, terrible things. So that the corporate media kind of creates an excited delirium. In other words, people get kind of excited about it, kind of addicted to it. So there's a hyper-reality that creates an excited delirium of knowinglessness. There's no content. People are just excited. So trying to understand the teabaggers who are excited about issues and saying, oh, single payer is socialism, or Obama's was born somewhere else, and I mean, these kind of excited things. There's no knowledge base. There's no context. So people get excited about stuff and they can gossip about it, but they really don't know what's going on. So that is very dangerous for democracy. That is very dangerous. I think the Somali pirates is certainly one piece of explaining what's happening in terms of hyper-reality in the world and what corporate media is doing to us. And how these corporations now, this top-down, they're interlocked. So that we have a military, industrial, media complex that's really managed by just a few thousand people in this country. And you start to look at the networks of these people and who's in power and how they do that. We did this fairly extensive study on what we call the Global Dominance Group under the neocons, under the Bush administration. We identified 260 people who were the core people advocating for the U.S. military domination of the world. And we continue to see the increased expansion of wars. Military, we have 1,000 military bases around the world today. We're spending this year, Obama's budget is $704 billion. Now that's half of the entire world's military budget. So we're spending as much as the rest of the world combined, just the United States. So that our agenda, the United States American empire agenda, is military control of the world. And this isn't secret. I mean, they've been writing about this for decades. The Project for New American Century was publishing reports 10 years ago. It was part of Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Khalilzad and this network of neocons who are saying we have to have forward deployment of U.S. troops worldwide. We have to control and contain China. We have to control the international oil market to protect the dollar. And our main rivals are India, China, and Russia economically. And China was seen as the most dangerous. So our enemy, Iran, who we keep saying, threatening that we're going to invade, they're the ones selling oil to China. The Sudan, who we just indicted, got the criminal courts to indict their president, and the whole Darfur issue, the Chinese are in Sudan operating the oil fields that used to belong to Chevron. We don't like that. And so part of this is international rivalries to slow down China's economic development by controlling the oil in the world. And that's part of U.S. global dominance policy. But it's also militarily. So it's weapons all over the world, but also weapons from space and high-tech laser beams and stuff that'll take missiles down and being so technologically advanced that nobody can possibly challenge us in any way. And that's not to protect you and me. That's not to protect the American people. That's to protect American capital concentration, American capital power, and the biggest corporations and their global penetration of the world markets. That's the agenda. And so when you say that television is interlocked, the Carlyle Group, Bechtel, Boeing, Halliburton, Lockheed Martin all have people on their boards of directors who sit on the boards of directors of the top 10 media corporations in the United States. So it's closely interlocked, very concentrated. Now we look at Obama's work. What we basically did was Zabrinsky, who was Carter's foreign economic advisor, and Carter was part of the Trilateral Commission, as most presidents had been. Bill Clinton was as well. The Trilateral Commission was set up by Zabrinsky and Rockefeller back in the early 70s. It's an international planning group to plan for expansion of capital concentration worldwide. It's made up of Europeans, Asians, particularly the Japanese, and U.S. There's only 80 people in the U.S. who are part of the Trilateral Commission. 12 of them are in Obama's administration. So to take one group of 80 people, maybe about the equivalent of this people in this room, who all know each other, are part of a global planning policy group funded by the Rockefellers, and to find 12 of those people to run the State Department. So everybody in the State Department, except Hillary, as a member of the trial